them the right to take a life. He didn't give her no kind of care, no help. I can just feel her suffering, man.
Shanquella Robinson was 25 years old, a self-made entrepreneur operating out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and everything about the life she was constructing pointed towards someone who understood that success required discipline, creativity, and an absolute refusal to wait for opportunity to find her. She had not inherited her businesses or stumbled into them. She had built them deliberately, with her own hands and her own vision. The first enterprise was a children's hair braiding service she named Exquisite Babies, a business that required both technical skill and the kind of patience and warmth that parents entrust to very few people when it comes to their children. The second was Exquisite Boutique, a women's clothing operation that reflected her personal aesthetic and her understanding of what her community wanted to wear. Two businesses. Two distinct markets. Both hers. Her social media presence reinforced the image of a young woman on an upward trajectory, someone documenting the process of chasing something real, someone whose daily output suggested momentum rather than stagnation. She was not waiting for the world to make room for her. She was carving that room out herself. Her connection to Daejhanae Jackson traced back to their overlapping time at Winston-Salem State University. They were not inseparable friends in the traditional sense. They did not occupy the innermost ring of each other's social lives. But they moved through a shared orbit, and that orbit included a rotating cast of mutual connections that had solidified over years into something that resembled a friend group: Winter Donovan, Malik Dyer, Elise Hyatt, Khalil Cook, and Nazir Wiggins. Among all of those names, Khalil Cook occupied a position of particular significance in Shanquella's world. He had not simply been a social acquaintance she interacted with at group gatherings. He had been welcomed into the architecture of her family life. He had attended family events. He had traveled with her relatives. He had sat at her mother's table. Salamandra Robinson, Shanquella's mother, had developed genuine regard for Khalil over the course of that familiarity. She considered him reliable. She considered him trustworthy. She had, over time, extended to him the kind of confidence that a parent extends to someone they believe genuinely cares about their child. That confidence, placed with such sincerity, would become one of the most weaponized elements of this entire case, because the person Salamandra trusted to look after her daughter in a foreign country was the same person who would later call her, calm and unhurried, and lie directly to her about what had happened to Shanquella while she lay dying. The trip itself originated not as an inclusive group celebration but as something far more curated. By October 2022, Daejhanae Jackson had been in the process of organizing a Mexican getaway, a birthday trip intended to mark celebrations for both herself and Nazir Wiggins. She handled the operational side of everything, chose the destination, researched the accommodations, coordinated schedules, managed the logistics of assembling a group of people across different calendars and commitments. The location she selected was Cabo San Lucas, and more specifically, the group would be staying at Villa Linda 32, a property set within an exclusive residential enclave on the outskirts of San Jose del Cabo. Villa Linda 32 was not a budget rental. It was not a modest property with a pool and a guest book. It was 6,000 square feet of hacienda-style architecture, designed with the kind of deliberate luxury that communicates to its guests that they have arrived somewhere exceptional. 5 bedrooms, each with its own private bathroom. Expansive common areas that blurred the boundary between interior living and outdoor atmosphere. Views of the Pacific stretching out beyond the property line. It was the kind of place people photographed extensively and referenced for years afterward. The dates were set: October 28 through October 31, 2022. 4 days. A long weekend by any reasonable measure, but enough time for everything to fall apart completely. Shanquella Robinson was not part of the original guest list. That fact is not incidental. It is foundational to understanding the dynamics that existed within that villa from the moment the group arrived. Daejhanae had constructed this trip around a specific inner circle, and Shanquella was not a member of that circle. When a number of the originally invited guests dropped out, creating gaps in the roster, Khalil Cook reached out to Shanquella with what appeared to be a friendly, spontaneous invitation to join the group. From Shanquella's perspective, this was a trusted friend extending an opportunity to travel internationally, to spend a long weekend in one of Mexico's most celebrated resort destinations, to celebrate alongside people she had known for years. She had no framework for interpreting that invitation as anything other than what it appeared to be. The reality, stripped of any charitable interpretation, was that she was a fill-in. She was occupying a slot vacated by someone else. She was not chosen because the group specifically wanted her there. She was selected because she was available and because she was willing. What makes this structural fact significantly more disturbing is the financial dimension that accompanied it. Despite being the last person added to the trip, the afterthought who rounded out the numbers, Shanquella Robinson reportedly contributed more financially to this vacation than her position in the group would suggest was appropriate or fair. According to accounts that emerged in the aftermath of her death, she allegedly covered the majority of the trip's shared expenses. The birthday celebration for Dejanay Jackson and Nazir Wiggins, the villa rental, the logistics, the weekend they had all been planning, was in large part made financially viable by money provided by the person who had only been invited because others could not make it. This is the contradiction at the core of Shanquella's presence on that trip. She was financially essential to making it happen and socially peripheral to the group for whom it was happening. She was indispensable in the bank account sense and disposable in every other sense. She kept the trip alive while never truly belonging to it. The morning of October 28, 2022, the group boarded their flights and headed south toward Mexico. Whatever any of them knew or suspected or had planned for those 4 days, the journey began in the ordinary way that group travel begins, with the familiar rhythm of airports and luggage and the shared anticipation of arriving somewhere warm and beautiful. When the group reached Villa Linda 32 and moved through its rooms for the first time, Shanquella Robinson's response to the property was immediate and genuine. She pulled out her phone and began documenting what she was seeing, capturing clips for her Instagram stories: the sprawling pool, the ocean horizon, the opulent rooms, the atmosphere of a place that felt designed to make its guests feel like they were living at a different altitude. Those clips exist. They are a record of a young woman who was happy in that moment, who had no visible awareness of what was being constructed around her, who was experiencing the early hours of what she believed was going to be a celebratory weekend with people she had known for years. In those videos, there is no tension visible on her face. There is no guardedness in her posture. She was present, excited, and entirely unaware. That evening, she called her mother. The conversation that Salamandra Robinson has described from that call is one of the most painful threads in this entire case, because of how ordinary it was, how completely devoid of any signal that anything was wrong. Shanquella told her mother about the villa. She mentioned the private chef on the property, described tacos being prepared for the group's dinner. She sounded animated and content. Salamandra, hearing nothing in her daughter's voice to cause concern, told her to enjoy herself and said she would call again the next day. Those were the last words Salamandra Robinson ever heard her daughter speak. By the following morning, less than 24 hours after Shanquella had landed at their destination, the situation inside Villa Linda 32 had become something that no reasonable person boarding that flight on October 28 could have imagined. The assault on Shanquella Robinson took place the morning after the group arrived. Dejanay Jackson physically attacked her. What the video footage that would eventually be released publicly makes undeniably clear is that this was not a fight between two people. It was not a mutual altercation that escalated out of a disagreement. Shanquella was not throwing punches. She was not attempting to defend herself with any sustained effectiveness. She was being struck repeatedly by someone who was not holding back, while she appeared unable or unwilling to mount a meaningful response. The people in the room during this assault were not bystanders who happened to be passing through. They were the same individuals who had traveled with Shanquella to Mexico, who had been present at dinner the night before, who had listened to her talk about how much fun she was having. Some of them were recording the assault on their phones. Others were standing and watching. Voices on the recording expressed not alarm or intervention, but frustration that Shanquella was not fighting back. There was encouragement directed at the aggressor. There was an instruction to get up aimed at the person being beaten. Not one person in that room moved to physically intervene and stop what was happening. 6 people, all of them adults, all of them capable of stepping between 2 people, and every single one of them either actively participated through their inaction or vocally contributed to an atmosphere that allowed the assault to continue unimpeded. The physical consequences of what Shanquella endured during that assault were catastrophic, though the full severity of those consequences would not be publicly confirmed until weeks later when the Mexican death certificate became available. In the immediate aftermath of the beating, Shanquella was in serious medical distress. The appropriate response to what the group had witnessed, to a person who had just sustained the kind of physical trauma visible on that footage, would have been to immediately contact emergency services, to call an ambulance, to get that person to a hospital without deliberation or delay. That is not what happened. Instead, hours passed. The group remained inside the villa. No emergency call was placed. No ambulance was summoned. No one reached out to Shanquella's family to explain what had happened and to ask for guidance or consent to seek medical attention. The decision made, implicitly or explicitly, in those hours was to wait and to manage the narrative rather than to address the medical emergency unfolding in front of them. At 2:13 in the afternoon, someone inside the villa finally contacted the property staff to request medical assistance. The description of Shanquella's condition that was provided in that request was not a truthful account of what had happened. The staff was told that Shanquella had consumed too much alcohol and was in need of hydration. It was an explanation that attributed her deterioration to a personal choice rather than to an assault. It was a cover story, and it was being deployed within hours of the incident that caused her injuries, suggesting that the decision to obscure what had occurred was not spontaneous or panicked but deliberate and coordinated. While that request was being processed, Khalil Cook placed a call to Shanquella Robinson in Charlotte, North Carolina. His tone throughout that call, as Shanquella has described it, was relaxed and controlled. He told her that Shanquella was not feeling particularly well, that she had had a bit too much to drink, and that they were taking care of her. He said nothing about a physical altercation. He said nothing about the severity of her condition. He reassured a mother who had no reason to doubt him, because he had spent years cultivating precisely the kind of trust that made his reassurance credible. Shanquella accepted what he told her. She had every reason to. Khalil Cook had built himself into the fabric of her family's life specifically so that his word would be believed without question, and in that moment, he used that credibility to keep a grieving mother calm while her daughter lay dying in a villa in Mexico. Dr. Carolina Gutierrez of the American Medical Center arrived at Villa Linda 32 at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon. What she encountered when she reached Shanquella bore no resemblance to the description that had prompted the medical request. Dr. Gutierrez was a trained physician. She was capable of assessing the difference between dehydration resulting from alcohol consumption and the kind of physical deterioration caused by traumatic injury, and what she saw in that room was unambiguously the latter. Shanquella Robinson was not presenting as someone who needed fluids and rest. She was presenting as someone in acute medical crisis, exhibiting signs that a physician recognized as consistent with severe physical trauma. Dr. Gutierrez communicated this assessment to the group clearly and directly. She did not hedge her recommendation. She told them, repeatedly and urgently, that Shanquella needed to be transported to a hospital. She told them that the level of care she could provide on-site was wholly insufficient for the severity of what she was observing. Every time she made this recommendation, the group refused. They offered explanations that shifted slightly with each refusal but amounted to the same thing: they did not want Shanquella taken to a hospital. They cited financial concerns about emergency room costs. They insisted that Shanquella had experienced similar episodes in the past and had always recovered with fluids alone, a claim that was medically irrelevant and factually implausible given what the doctor was observing in front of her. Dr. Gutierrez addressed each excuse. She told them that public hospitals in the Cabo region did not require upfront payment. She suggested contacting Shanquella's family directly so that someone with actual authority over Shanquella's medical decisions could authorize transport. The group had a response for every alternative she proposed, and every response was a variation on the same refusal. Dr. Gutierrez escalated internally. She contacted her supervisor to report what she was witnessing and to explain that her medical judgment was being overridden by people who were not medically qualified to make that determination. Her supervisor's response reflected the legal reality of the situation. Without the consent of the people in that room, the physician could not compel transport. She was advised to consider withdrawing from the scene if the group continued to refuse her recommendations. Dr. Gutierrez did not immediately withdraw. She continued attempting to provide whatever care was available to her within the constraints of their refusal. She attempted on multiple occasions to establish access so that fluids could be administered directly. The first attempt failed. The second attempt failed. On the third attempt, she succeeded in placing the line. Almost immediately after the was established and fluids began flowing, Shanquella Robinson suffered a severe seizure. The convulsion was violent enough to dislodge the line that had just been placed. The people in that room, the same people who had spent hours refusing every hospitalization recommendation, watched a seizure unfold and panicked. They did not step forward to assist. They fled. They scattered from the room and left Dr. Gutierrez alone with an unconscious, seizing woman who was rapidly losing whatever time remained. Dr. Gutierrez had to raise her voice and demand that someone in that villa call emergency services immediately. It was Winter Donovan who eventually made the call, and she handed her phone to the doctor so that Dr. Gutierrez could speak directly with emergency dispatch. At 4:49 in the afternoon, Dr. Gutierrez confirmed that Shanquella Robinson no longer had a detectable pulse. She placed a second call to emergency services as a follow-up. A Red Cross ambulance pulled up to the property within 5 minutes of that call. The paramedics who arrived assessed Shanquella and determined that because she had no vital signs, transport protocols could not be initiated under their operational guidelines. 3 additional ambulances subsequently arrived at the villa. Each team reached the same conclusion. Emergency medical personnel worked on Shanquella Robinson for more than an hour, attempting resuscitation on site. At 5:57 in the evening, on October 29, 2022, Shanquella Robinson was officially pronounced dead. She had arrived in Mexico less than 24 hours earlier. She had called her mother the night before to describe tacos and a beautiful villa. She was 25 years old. Khalil Cook delivered the news of Shanquella's death to Salamandra Robinson by phone. Salamandra has described that call in detail in the period since, and what she emphasizes most consistently is not the content of what Khalil said but the manner in which he said it. He was not overcome with emotion. He did not struggle to get the words out. He communicated the fact of her daughter's death with a composure that Salamandra found, even in her shock, deeply unsettling. He expressed condolences and moved on. There was no distress in his voice that matched the weight of what he was conveying. A woman who had been part of their lives, who had traveled internationally under what was supposed to be his care, had just died in a foreign country, and the person calling to report it sounded like he was delivering routine information. After Mexican law enforcement arrived at Villa Linda 32 and began the process of documenting the scene, taking statements, and conducting their preliminary investigation, the group's behavior took a direction that would later become one of the most cited indicators of their collective consciousness of guilt. They gathered their belongings. They requested a vehicle from the property, telling staff they wanted transportation to dinner. The driver was directed not toward a restaurant but toward accommodations near the airport. By the following morning, all 6 individuals had boarded flights back to the United States. They left a full day before their originally booked trip was scheduled to conclude. They left Shanquella Robinson behind in Mexico, in a foreign country, in the custody of authorities, and flew home to the comfort and safety of their ordinary lives. Dejanay Jackson, the woman who had organized the trip, who had physically assaulted Shanquella, who had been present and central during every hour of obstruction that followed the assault, also coordinated and participated in the group's swift departure from Mexican soil. Once back in Charlotte, Khalil Cook and Dejanay Jackson appeared at the Robinson family home. They brought Shanquella's luggage with them. They offered what presented as sympathy. Salamandra received them because she was still operating within the framework of trust she had extended to these people over years, and because the full truth of what had happened to her daughter had not yet broken through the wall of lies surrounding it. Other members of the group came separately in the days that followed, each visiting the family with their own version of events. The accounts did not align. Some said they had found Shanquella unresponsive. Others described discovering her in bed. One version introduced the villa's housekeeping staff as the ones who had made the discovery. Another credited the friends. The core facts of who found her, when, and in what condition shifted with each telling, and no two stories matched closely enough to suggest they were describing the same reality. This is what coordinated deception under pressure looks like when the participants have not aligned their stories sufficiently. It fractures along individual seams, and each fracture adds weight to the overall structure of suspicion. Salamandra Robinson, confronting the accumulating inconsistencies, began pressing harder for information. She reached out directly to the resort property in Mexico, determined to obtain an account of those final hours from a source independent of the people who had been lying to her. It took effort and persistence to reach someone willing to share substantive information, but she eventually connected with a property manager who provided details that stood in direct contradiction to everything the group had told her. The first honest account Salamandra Robinson received of what had happened to her daughter in Mexico did not come from anyone who had traveled there with Shanquella. It came from a stranger. That fact is stark and worth holding for a moment. The people who claimed to love Shanquella, who had eaten dinner with her the night before she died, who had been in the same building when she was assaulted, who were present when the doctor arrived and when the ambulances came, those people had told her mother nothing truthful. A resort manager in a foreign country told her more about her daughter's final hours than any of the 6 people who had been standing in the same room. Around the same period, Salamandra received an anonymous phone call. The caller, whose identity she never established, stated plainly that Shanquella had been in a physical altercation and had been attacked by people in the group. When Salamandra brought this information directly to the group members who were still visiting the family home at that point, they denied it. They cried. They sat in Salamandra's living room and discussed what they planned to wear to Shanquella's funeral, selecting colors and coordinating their attendance at the service of a woman whose death they had caused, covered up, and lied about to her grieving mother. On November 5, 2022, Salamandra Robinson received the official death certificate issued by Mexican authorities. Every constructed narrative that had been maintained for more than a week collapsed the moment that document came into focus. The cause of death recorded was not alcohol intoxication. It was not cardiac arrest, which had been the framing offered by initial Mexican police reports. The death certificate stated that Shanquella Robinson died as a result of a severe spinal cord injury, specifically, an atlas luxation, a dislocation at the topmost vertebra of the cervical spine, the junction between the skull and the neck. This is the kind of injury that results from extreme force applied to the head and neck. It is not the kind of injury associated with alcohol consumption or cardiac events. It is consistent with a violent physical assault. The approximate time of death recorded on the certificate was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, approximately 15 minutes after the injuries were sustained. That timeline confirms that when Dr. Gutierrez arrived at 3:15 and began urging the group to authorize hospital transport, Shanquella Robinson may already have been beyond the point where any intervention could have saved her. The window in which her life might have been preserved was the window the group had spent hours keeping closed, refusing every recommendation, blocking every attempt to get her proper care, while feeding a cover story to property staff and lying to her mother over the phone. For more than a week, across multiple visits to the family home and multiple phone calls, 6 people had maintained a collective deception against a mother who was burying her daughter. The moment the death certificate became public, communication from every member of the group stopped completely. No more visits. No more condolence calls. No more coordination of funeral outfit colors. Total silence from all 6 individuals, simultaneous and absolute. If that silence is the behavior of people with nothing to conceal, it is an extraordinarily difficult case to make. On November 16, 2022, video footage from inside Villa Linda 32 was released publicly by someone connected to the group. The footage showed Shanquella Robinson being physically beaten by another woman while others in the room stood watching. She was unclothed. She was not fighting back with any meaningful resistance. The voices on the recording belonged to people who could have stopped what was happening and did not. The footage spread across every major social media platform within hours of its release. The public response was immediate and enormous. The hashtag Justice for Shanquella began trending nationally. Thousands of people organized online. Rallies and demonstrations were held in multiple cities. Hundreds attended her funeral in Charlotte, surrounding her family in an expression of collective mourning and shared outrage. The visibility of the case forced a response at the institutional level. Mexican authorities, who had initially characterized Shanquella's death in ways that fell short of the truth the death certificate would later reveal, reopened their investigation in response to both the footage and the public pressure surrounding it. Prosecutors formally issued an arrest warrant identifying the primary aggressor in the assault, widely understood to refer to Daejhanae Jackson. The warrant existed. The evidence existed. The video existed. The death certificate existed. And yet no arrest was ever executed. The legal framework governing international arrest warrants created an immediate structural obstacle. As legal analysts who commented on the case explained, a warrant issued by Mexican authorities carries no direct enforcement power within the United States. No American law enforcement officer, regardless of rank or jurisdiction, has the authority to detain a person on the basis of a foreign warrant alone. For the Mexican arrest warrant to result in an actual apprehension on American soil, the Mexican government would need to transmit its evidence and probable cause documentation through the formal extradition process, allowing American authorities to evaluate the material and, if sufficient, convert the foreign warrant into a domestically valid instrument. That process is not fast. It is not guaranteed. It operates through diplomatic channels that move on their own timeline, independent of public pressure or the urgency of any particular family's grief. The United States conducted its own independent forensic examination of Shanquella Robinson's death and arrived at a conclusion that diverged significantly from the Mexican findings. American forensic authorities classified her cause of death as undetermined, a categorization that sits in uncomfortable tension with a death certificate from the country where she died that identifies a specific catastrophic physical injury as the cause. The gap between those two official determinations has created the legal ambiguity that has allowed this case to remain unresolved at the criminal level. Daejhanae Jackson, in the period following the case becoming a matter of national attention, legally changed her name to Amani Green and moved to a different state. The timing and nature of those changes, taken together, are consistent with an effort to detach her legal identity from the name that had become publicly associated with Shanquella Robinson's death and the footage that documented the assault. Relocating and renaming after an arrest warrant has been issued and after video evidence of a violent act has circulated globally is not the behavior pattern of someone with confidence in their innocence. The Robinson family, facing a criminal justice process that had stalled on both sides of an international border, pursued accountability through the civil court system, filing a lawsuit against all 6 individuals who had been present inside Villa Linda 32 during those 3 days in October 2022. The legal argument underpinning the civil action extended beyond the person who delivered the physical blows. It encompassed every individual who had watched the assault without intervening, who had blocked medical care for hours while Shanquella deteriorated, who had constructed and maintained a false account of her death and delivered that account repeatedly to her family, and who had boarded flights out of Mexico the morning after she died, leaving her body behind. In legal filings responding to the civil claims, Daejhanae Jackson asserted that Shanquella Robinson had been the one to initiate the confrontation and that her own actions had constituted self-defense. That assertion was offered by someone whose documented conduct, preserved on video and corroborated by a death certificate identifying a catastrophic spinal injury as the cause of death, points in an entirely different direction. The FBI's Charlotte field office formally opened an investigation into the case, adding federal resources to what had already become an internationally visible inquiry. Mexican prosecutors elevated the characterization of the charges to femicide, a classification that treats the killing as a gender-motivated homicide and carries distinct legal consequences under Mexican law. Femicide charges reflect an acknowledgement by the prosecuting authority that what happened to Shanquella Robinson was not an accident, was not attributable to alcohol or natural causes, and was a deliberate act of violence against a woman. That characterization, issued by the country where the death occurred, on the basis of the forensic evidence collected in that country, has never been successfully challenged on its factual merits. What has prevented it from resulting in an arrest is not a deficiency in the evidence but the structural mechanics of international law and the forensic disagreement between American and Mexican pathologists regarding the official classification of cause of death. Shanquella Robinson would have turned 26 the month after she died. She would have been celebrating a birthday during a holiday season that her family instead spent navigating grief, demanding answers from institutions that moved slowly, and confronting the people who had sat in their home and lied to their faces about how she died. Her father stood over her at the funeral home and made a promise to her that she would not die without consequence, that he would pursue the truth to whatever depth it required. Her mother has spoken about Shanquella's ambitions, her relentless focus on building her businesses into something lasting, her love of travel and people, her conviction that she could accomplish anything she committed herself to pursuing. These are not abstractions. They are the specific contours of a life that was extinguished not by accident or illness but by violence and by the collective decision of 6 people to prioritize their own protection over hers. Every refusal to authorize hospital transport was a choice. Every lie told to Salamandra Robinson was a choice. Every boarding pass purchased for the flights home the morning after her death was a choice. The coordination required to maintain a unified false account across multiple visits to a grieving family over more than a week was not instinct. It was deliberate. It was organized. And it was carried out by people who had traveled internationally with Shanquella Robinson, eaten dinner with her the night before she was assaulted, and then stood in her mother's living room and selected their funeral attire while her body was still in Mexico. The Robinson family has not stopped demanding accountability. They have not retreated from public view. They continue to speak Shanquella's name in every forum available to them, pushing against a legal process that has moved with agonizing slowness and a public attention span that moves even faster. The civil lawsuit remains an active mechanism for pursuing consequences where the criminal system has so far failed to deliver them. The FBI investigation has not been formally closed. The Mexican arrest warrant remains on record. Dejanay Jackson, now operating under the name Amani Green, has not faced criminal prosecution in any jurisdiction as of the time of this account. The 5 other individuals who were present in that villa have not been criminally charged. What exists, and what has always existed in this case, is a documented physical assault on video, a death certificate identifying a catastrophic cervical injury as the cause of death, a formal arrest warrant from the country where the death occurred, a physician's testimony about the group's sustained refusal to authorize medical transport, a pattern of contradictory and evolving accounts delivered to the victim's family over a period of weeks, and the simultaneous, total withdrawal of all 6 individuals from contact with the Robinson family the moment the death certificate became public. Shanquella Robinson trusted the people around her enough to cross an international border with them. She paid for a significant portion of a trip to which she had been invited only as a replacement for someone else. She called her mother from that trip, happy and excited, and described tacos and ocean views and a beautiful villa. She did not come home. The people who were supposed to be her friends did. They boarded their flights, sat in their seats, landed in the United States, drove to her family's house, and looked her mother in the eye. The case of Shanquella Robinson is not closed. Her name has not been forgotten. And the questions that remain unanswered are not small ones.